I think one of the most consequential misconceptions is about how we believe morality actually functions and how we believe we can justify moral actions. I believe the confusion comes from the fact that we're dealing with an internal phenomenon here. We're not talking about a physical object. We're pretty good at dealing with physical objects and manipulating physical objects, modeling them. But when it comes to internal phenomena like consciousness-related facts, like morality, for example, we are kind of not really good at conceptualizing them. Oftentimes we conceptualize them in physicalist terms, which is not helping at all. Now, one very dominant view about morality is that for some moral action to be justified, it needs an absolute justification. It needs some kind of absolute reason which objectively binds every single individual to that moral action. So this action is not only good for me, but it will be good independently of who you are, right? So the present day conception of morality is that morality starts from a point of nowhere. In other words, morality would exist even if there were no beings, no experiencing creatures at all. Morality is something that exists prior to any experiencing being and is a form of law, a form of givenness that you have to subject yourself to. So whenever a being comes into existence, no matter its subjectivity, no matter its experience, it is bound by moral laws that are beyond its own subjectivity, something that transcends the subjectivity of the individual and comes from top down. In other words, if whatever individual is to be born into the universe, if it was to act in a moral way, it would have to follow a code that is external to itself. This is to totally misconceive of morality. The problem with this form of morality is it attempts to basically tell you what is worthy of attention, because this is at the heart of morality. At the heart of morality is the question, what ought I to do? So what is worthy of my attention, and how should I guide my attention? Should I, using my attention, perform this act, or should I ignore something, be blind to it, be cold to it, not be affected by it emotionally, and move my attention somewhere else and pay attention to something else? This is at the heart of the question of morality. And the assumption is that what is worthy of attention is something that is independent of the concrete being, and something that is pre-given, something that's universal and is the same for all creatures that are to come into existence. And this is absurd. The issue with that is that you can never actually come to even a single action which you can point out to be relevant to everybody in all given contexts. And the issue here is that unless you make a stop and say, well, we accept that these and these actions are absolutely valid for everybody, based on, for example, Holy Scripture and Revelation, you can never justify any single moral claim. And this is the position that, for example, many more fundamentalist thinkers insist on. They insist that unless something is given through a higher power to us, through revelation, there is no way of getting morality into the world. And this is like the worst way you can think about morality. The starting point of morality is the moment you have a creature which has attention, which is capable of moving its gaze, which is capable of ignoring something and paying attention to something else. And that's not only humans. This includes animals, obviously. And to this previous conception of morality, animals are not part of the moral horizon. They are neither moral subjects, actors, nor are they moral objects. Moral actors are to be held responsible, nor are they moral objects, which is something to be treated as valuable, or something as being concerned by moral actions of others. According to this conception, an animal doesn't really touch the moral sphere at all. And this is deeply flawed, because the moment you have attention, and this is something that a pedagogue, Klaus Prange, actually pointed out, at the heart of the pedagogical situation is your ability to follow the pointing gesture of somebody else. Uh, that's at the heart of human-to-human communication, or being-to-being communication, if you want. The ability of one individual to follow the gaze and the pointing gesture of another individual. This simply designates that your attention is not just everywhere, but your attention is where somebody else points you to. And the pointing gesture, of course, is not only literally that somebody points to something for you to see and take appreciation of, and therefore pay attention to relevance realize, as John Vervaeke might put it. This is not the only way of pointing, but the pointing gesture is the moment you express, for example, a dissatisfaction with something, or you exclaim that something is worthy of attention by being emotionally overtaken by it, for example. This is already something that the other side can see as a relevance pointing gesture. And animals are actually capable of this. Animals are capable of following your gaze. They're capable of looking where you point them to. If a being is generally incapable of that, it is generally incapable of changing its point of view. It's not capable of driving its of moving its attention willfully from one point to another point. And this is at the heart of moral action. And if you had never been able to do that in the first place, to follow the gaze of somebody else and follow the pointing gesture of somebody else, you would never have developed something like a distinct self-identity. And this is a point that has been made like very often by educators and sociologists like Mead, who have pointed out that the moment you are actually self-aware and thinking of yourself as a subject that is acting in the world and has moral responsibilities, you have already, without really being aware of it, followed the gaze of somebody else. You have already paid attention to what other people are pointing out to you as being relevant. You have already listened to how other people are perceiving the world and submitted your attention and submitted your subjectivity to their subjectivity, or coordinated your subjectivity with other people's subjectivities. This is the origination point of morality, and it is something that is much, much earlier than the conscious question about what should I do, what is the ought in a given situation. And what this gives us as a starting point is a perspective that is already there. So even with animals, they already have a sense for what is worthy of attention and what is not worthy of attention. You already have a given, a positive, in other words, which is that's worth running after, that's worth doing, that's worth paying attention to. And this is something that's not really worth, it's just something that I ignore. You already have a starting point. And the role of human morality is not from nowhere to bring in laws about what to do in a given situation and what not to do in a given situation, but it's the opposite. To take your starting point, which is in a sense egocentrical. It is a very small world which includes your own basic needs, and what you see as existing in the world and what you see as possibly relevant in the world. Take that point, or very punctual identity, which is however already there. It's not given through a command, it's not given through any kind of law, but it's given by virtue of you having consciousness in the first place and you being in a world. Taking that point and expanding it to include other creatures and to include other demands that are put on you, in a way that you can manage, in a way that is compatible with your personal boundaries and your personal limits as an embodied being. So you can't pay attention to everybody. However, in a given situation, there are reasonable degrees to which you can be expected to take notice of the concerns of the world surrounding you. However, if you are, for example, an animal, obviously the ability to take those concerns into account is significantly diminished, and therefore the responsibility that you actually are carrying with you is significantly diminished, and the expectation is not even placed upon you to be able to take in the concerns of what, for example, an adult would be expected to do, right? The subjectivity surrounding you that you would have to coordinate with, and the dimensions in which you would have to coordinate. Because if you think about morality, it's not just one dimensional. It's not just about hurting other people physically or not hurting them physically. It is just as moral, for example, if a teacher ignores their student. And this is not a pain, not pain relationship, or hurting, not hurting relationship, but this is a psychological form of pain, if you want, that you inflict as a teacher. If you ignore your duties as a teacher of paying respective attention to the students, listening them out, and helping them in specific situations, you are acting immorally within that context. And those contexts are innumerable. There are innumerable different contexts in which it might be the case that you don't live up to the potential of how you could guide your attention in such a way as to include the subjectivities and realities, social realities surrounding you. And see what the difference is. The difference is that we hereby are starting out with a subjectivity that already has a sense for what is worthy of being paid attention to. We don't start out from nothing and then we bring in a law into the world, but we start with an embodied experience that animals already have. And starting from that point, we expand it to include more and more and more. And the opposite view, unfortunately, is held unconsciously by many of us, many progressives, by the way, which is the assumption that you have to have a universalist approach. The idea of human rights, for example. Human rights are the same for everybody. Everybody has the same subjecthood. No matter how good you are at something, no matter how bad you are at something, you might even be an evil person. You might be smart, you might not be smart. However, subjecthood is something that's universal. Every subject is equal on the planet and has the same equal rights. And from this perspective, you would have to treat each and every individual equally. And this is the dilemma that many progressives find themselves in. That obviously, when you're given in a situation, for example, you have your own children being in danger and other children, of course, everybody would choose to protect their own children first and save their own children or their own spouse first in a dangerous situation to saving somebody else. But looking from a universalist perspective, this is immoral. From a universalist perspective, everybody deserves your attention equally. And you would have, in a given situation, to pay the same attention to somebody who is very foreign to you, you've never interacted with, as with somebody who is part of your family. And this is obviously wrong. This is obviously absurd. This is not compatible with how we human beings experience life. And obviously the commitments that we have to the relevant others that are surrounding us are of entirely different quality to us. And it's not a bug, if you want it. We are paying more attention to those people who we feel are close to us. But it is actually something that is an expression of how subjectivity works in the first place. How subjectivity works in the first place is that you start out with a very punctual identity, which concerns your own needs and the needs of your closest people around you, which is usually a very, very small circle of people who really, really concern you. And what you try to do is you try to expand that on other people, but you don't start from the opposite position. You don't start from I have no idea what to do in life. I have no idea to whom to listen to. This is just, it would be a lie if this was our position, because you've already listened. You've already listened to what your parents are telling you. And not in the sense that you're doing what they tell you literally explicitly to do, but in the sense that when they speak to you, even by the fact of paying attention to them and not just ignoring them like they're a car and making a noise, but you're listening to them as human beings who are making something a concern to you. In already doing that, you already have a moral horizon from the very beginning. And what you do is you expand that moral horizon, which is already existing, by for example, binding yourself to certain rules and taking concerns of others into account, and always within the amount or the limit which is possible for you as a human being to actually parse and to actually live, because there are always boundaries where you just can't pay attention to people that are totally foreign to you. You can't treat them in an equal way to the people that are part of your moral horizon, and you cannot be expected to do that. And this is a huge conflict that I believe our present day, very modernist and postmodernist identities have to figure out how to deal with. Because on the one hand, we have the expectation, this universalist expectation, which is taken by religious tradition, by the way. It is the postmodern conception, or the universalist conception that you basically have to treat everybody else as equal, is taken from a religious tradition, which again, as a starting point, begins with there is universal law that is binding each and everybody else. And both are absurd. Both are not compatible with human experience and with human consciousness. And conceptualize human consciousness, ironically, not in terms of what it is, subjectivity, but in terms of objecthood, because only objects are independent of each other. Only objects exist, if you want, in a universal space that is the same for everybody else. And we are using precisely these object relation ways of thinking and applying them on human subjectivity, and they are definitely misapplying that, leading to the very, very uncomfortable, pragmatic, and this is not a theoretical and philosophical speculation here, but we are living in times in which we can't bring together our way of thinking about reality, for example, assuming human rights, with the reality of our human embodied existence as conscious creatures. There is a deep misconception, a deep contradiction between both. You can see it in the movie The Matrix. This is something that Wilbur once pointed out. Neo has to make the choice between saving Trinity and saving humanity, right? The universal, everybody, and Trinity, like the personal relationship with a person. And this is an age-old conflict that we are all facing, which does not find a resolution in emphasizing the universal and emphasizing the disembodied perspective of treating everybody as equal. It's something that's not livable. It's something that might look nice in a movie, and in the movie, by the way, he chooses Trinity. He doesn't choose the universal and save humanity, but he chooses actually the personal. It is not something that you can consistently live as a human being, to always choose the universal. The universal has a role when you approach it from the perspective of systems. Within certain systems, social systems, for example, they have to treat everybody as equal, but it's not something that you as a subject can apply in your own personal life. And if, on the other hand, we had a more modest approach to morality, which just doesn't expect you to do the absolutely right thing, but expect you to do the relatively better thing, starting from the perspective where you're already at. And the perspective that you're at might be extremely egocentrical, might be extremely focused about your own needs. Instead of jumping from that to everybody is equal, it would already be an act of moral progression if you disidentified yourself from certain needs and just took some of the needs of somebody else into account. Not all of them, you don't have to save their life, but take the need of somebody else into account, of just listening to them and paying attention to what they say. You don't have to agree with it, you don't have to understand it. Just the very act of attempting to listening to somebody else is already a moral expanse. It's already becoming bigger, making your moral horizon bigger than it was before. However, we choose the opposite. We choose to make absolute moralist claims that have to be fulfilled. Otherwise, you're just acting absolutely immorally. And obviously, no one can live up to them. No one can live up to the either religious or modern and postmodern prescriptions of how to guide your attention in this world. Obviously, you can't feel the same for everybody in this world. And all you can do is start out wherever you are and attempt to expand that horizon. And this is a really tricky issue. It's very difficult to think about this because, again, all we have available are conceptions that usually are useful when we're dealing with object-object relationships, but not when it comes to subjectivity. Subjectivity is just not of that kind of nature. It doesn't have these boundaries and clear objective features. Subjectivity, for example, doesn't have a clear boundary. You couldn't say this is where your subjectivity begins and this is where your subjectivity ends, like you could do with an object. It has entirely different features, and I believe it will take us at least a few hundred years to, as a species, actually find ways of thinking about subjectivity in terms that is not making subjectivity into an object and thereby totally misforming it. And this deformation of subjectivity has deep-seated consequences for societies at large, because societies cannot function with such deep misconceptions about what human beings actually are and how human consciousness operates in the first place.